Hello, I'm Jose. I'm going to be refuting the claim that waterboarding is a form of torture and is far too severe for our military to use. Waterboarding has been used as an enhanced interrogation by the government and the military for several years. However, the question of whether it's a successful form of interrogation seems to arise almost instantaneously. My opposition's claims were that waterboarding is illegal, it is extremely painful and has many long-term effects, and that waterboarding is not effective. I believe that waterboarding is only justified when a national threat arises and a need to protect the nation's citizens ascends. My claim is that waterboarding should be done when the situation forces us to do so. My first supporting claim is that the government must react to events with a swift approach. Waterboarding is illegal within national law and international law, according to the Online Encyclopedia of Britannica. However, as Vice President Cheney said, we also have to work, though, sort of the dark side, if you will. We've got to spend time in the shadows in the intelligence world, and a lot of what needs to be done here will have to be done quietly, without any discussion, using sources and methods that are available to our intelligence agencies. If we're going to be successful, that's the world these folks operate in, and it's going to be vital for us to use any means at our disposal, basically, to achieve our objective. Our enemies do not abide to the international law, and that places our specialized military in quite a disadvantage. Imagine if the military caught a terrorist and the only means of interrogation was to speak to him. Sounds outrageous, does it not? My opposition proclaimed that waterboarding causes mental and physical effects, though I cannot disagree that placing water into your lungs has no physical side effect on a person's health. I will, however, argue about the mental damages associated with waterboarding. This leads to my second supporting claim that those who are waterboarded are often already mentally and emotionally unstable prior to the actual interrogation. We must assess that the people who undergo waterboarding have done a great deal of damage to international security or are associated with extremist groups such as Al-Qaeda. Those who become terrorists feel the need for change due to several reasons, such as poverty, globalization, or simply revolution. According to Albert J. Bergeson, a political scientist in the University of Arizona, terrorist demands become more vague, hazy, and non-existent. This shows that terrorist groups do not have a unified objective anymore and act due to hatred. The final claim that my opposition addresses is in regard with the effectiveness of waterboarding. My opposition states that this mock execution, which is also illegal, may not be reliable because, essentially, anyone is under the impression that they are going to die, might make false confessions, or say anything to save their own life. However, we have seen in the past that it has worked. An article on the New York Times stated one detainee who apparently was subjected to some tough treatment provided a crucial description of bin Laden's career. With this said, the information gathered from this detainee later led to the capture of this terrorist. So waterboarding has been used just recently and has been proven to work effectively. In conclusion, I feel as though the military and the government have used waterboarding on those who have infringed the rights of others because the situation required them to do so.
Okay, you ID the topic, the issues get labeled as you go along. You do have this kind of justification argument that you're presenting that suggests that there's only a limited context in which this would be appropriate, and so you kind of introduce a value element into the argument. I think there's some grounds to say that the advocate also presented some value standards, especially if we're going to be focusing on some legal criteria here and whether or or not those standards are legitimate standards. I think that there's a good press to be made there. It needs to be a little bit more direct when you get to that particular point. But in the long run, it comes down to, the unusual circumstances with high stakes often require us to use particular techniques. And I think that's the way you want to phrase it, is that they require us to do this, not that it's justified to do that, because that brings in that value issue that's going on there. On the first point, it seems like you mostly concede the issue of legality, although I think that there are a lot of international arguments that suggest that this doesn't fit into the categories of torture that is often used to suggest that it's illegal. But you kind of concede that issue and just say, we're back to our justification issue that we have to operate under the circumstances in which we live in. And the quote that you have from Cheney there, I think, explains that conditional argument that you're making. And this is really a very conditional argument. I think one of the things you want to point out is that nobody advocates the use of this in daily circumstances or in typical circumstances, but they advocated use of extraordinary circumstances. One of the things that's missing here, for example, is a discussion about how frequently the United States used waterboarding and on what terror suspects it's used waterboarding on. And I think that would be something that would help you diminish the importance of that argument. I do like the kind of counterclaim that you have built in here that says, look, these people are nuts already. And I think that that does kind of minimize his argument on the second point, that there is some mental effect that's going on here. The physical effect, I don't know if there are long-term physical effects. Obviously, there's a physical effect when somebody's undergoing the process, but whether or not there's a long-term effect, you seem to be conceding that, and I don't know whether or not that's an important concession to make. On the last point, on its effectiveness, I think that you've got a single example that you're presenting here, and I think that that's a pretty good example, demonstrates the importance. And then, again, you come back to your justification argument, which I think this works better in policy discussion and value arguments than it does in this factual issue. I think you're better off sticking with the notion that waterboarding works, which is the counterpoint to the advocate's claim here, not just that we used it in these particular conditions, but that we have gotten results from using it. And I thought you did a pretty good job of that. I do think that you sometimes leave the advocate's evidence on the table without much of a response. All right, thank you.